Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for Ready for the Draft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 41 of the 2020 podcast series. Wait a minute. The NFL Draft has come and gone April 23rd through the 25th. The last 40 episodes we've dedicated to the 2020 NFL Draft. All the way back in August, really getting you ready for the start of the college football season, all the way through the college football season, taking a look at some of the players to really start to get to know. Once the season was over, we really started into the pre-draft process, getting into the combine, taking a look at who the combine snubs were as we built all the way through, taking a look at the position by position, taking a look at teams and what it meant for each of the teams, taking a look at free agency and what impact it had on each of the teams as well, and then finally getting into the mock drafts, really delving into where we saw the different players going, what were the team needs, what were the draft boards looking like, and then once the draft was completed, we went through our post-draft edition, taking a look at every single draft pick along with some of the undrafted free agents as well. So what's left to cover of the 2020 NFL Draft? There really isn't. So there's never too early of a time to look ahead. And really, the last episode of the 2020 podcast series really kicks off things, taking a look forward to the 2021 draft. Really, we're talking about what to expect for the 2020 college football season. I guess the big question is are we going to have a season? With COVID-19, everything, all the uncertainty going on, is the economy really going to start opening up? What is that going to look like? A lot of the social distancing, you're not going to be seeing a lot of really large crowds, at least until 2021. What does that mean for the 2020 football season? Are we going to have games? Are we going to have limited capacity to some of those games? Are we not going to have any players, any fans at all? There are a lot of different question marks that are up in the air, but I think more and more, everyone's pushing towards having a college football season. And I think if we do that, these are the players, I really want to cover who to keep an eye out for that 2020 college football season. I think it really can be a special season when it's all said and done. There are a lot of players that are out there that we need to get to know right away because frankly, these are going to be some of the guys, the names that you obviously want to know. Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields at the quarterback position, Penei Sewell, the offensive tackle, Gregory Rousseau, talented defensive end. There's Micah Parsons and Dylan Moses at linebacker, and at the cornerback position you have Shaun Wade, Patrick Surtain, Paulson Adebo. So those are just a few of the names that we're going to be talking about, and there's a lot to cover in just a short period of time. So I want to make sure that I'm covering as many players to keep an eye out for as we get into the 2020 season. Look, when we kick off the 2021 podcast series for the 2021 NFL Draft, which will be set next April, I believe May 1st is the last day of that draft. We're going to go ahead and go through a lot of these players again. We'll start taking a look at some of the top 10 lists. But between now and the start of the season, I'm going to be looking at more game film. I'm going to go back, take a look at my notes as well, and really make sure that I've got a good jumping off point for my top 10 by position. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into things. And who's going to be that number one overall pick? Who is it that everyone's going to be talking about? Look, at the beginning of the season, nobody was talking about Joe Burrow. The year before that, nobody was talking about Kyler Murray. And frankly, even the year before that, Baker Mayfield was not on anybody's radar as the number one overall pick. So it's going to be interesting. Will it be Trevor Lawrence out of Clemson? I think that's really the guy that everyone's pegged as the number one overall pick. Look, this past year, everyone was expecting Tua to be that guy. And we know what happened with Tua from an injury standpoint. Hopefully, with Trevor Lawrence, he has a not only a productive season, but he also stays healthy. And I'd like to see whether or not he can be the number one overall pick. Look, this is a kid who came to Clemson, won a national title in his second year, defending that title, got all the way to the national championship before losing to Joe Burrow and those LSU Tigers. And, Trevor Lawrence walks on campus, really was that guy that everyone was keeping an eye out for. And this guy's already, over 65% completion percentage, just under 7,000 yards with 66 touchdowns and just 12 interceptions. He did double the interception count, from his freshman year to his sophomore year. Decision making, there were some question marks there at times, but this kid, there's definitely if you're talking about a safe pick at the quarterback position, this is going to be the guy. He has all the tools that you're looking for, tremendous arm strength. He makes next level throws with, some of his passes in the pocket over the middle, and down the football field, fitting it through 3, 4, sometimes even 5 defenders, hitting a receiver in stride. It's remarkable what, with that ball placement, the arm strength. He can make any of the throws in the route tree, and the athleticism, his ability to make plays with his legs, and not only, extending plays, getting outside the pocket, throwing well on the run with accuracy, by the way, and with great velocity, but he can take off and tuck it and run whenever he needs to as well. I mean, over 700 yards on the ground and 10 touchdowns in his 2 seasons there at Clemson. But is he going to be the first overall pick? That's really the biggest question that I think everybody has. And look, Penei Sewell out of Oregon, this dude is dominant, about as dominant and about as sure a thing at the offensive tackle position as we've had in quite a while. We've had some down seasons in terms of the offensive tackle position, but look, Penei Sewell is one of those generational type tackles, in my opinion. This is a guy who just has so much athleticism. His ability, his movement skills are ridiculous. His ability to get out in front of the running backs and really be a lead blocker, has that powerful initial punch. He wins there with at the running game, below the waist. You see him really driving that leg drive to really generate a ton of movement. Mario Cristobal established really a new attitude there with the Oregon Ducks in Eugene. And, you've got CJ Verdell, you've got, Travis Dye, you've got Cyrus Abibi-Likio, you've got that trio, that stable of running backs. And Penei Sewell was able to be that lead guy. He got out and was 2, 3, 4, 5 yards down the field blocking for these running backs. And then in the pass sets, just so effortless with his kick slides, with his movements. The initial kick step gets excellent depth, takes great angles, the lateral agility to be able to counter the secondary moves. Any team that's looking for an offensive tackle, and I'm telling you, this is what I believe is going to end up happening, is you look at Penei Sewell, and mark my words, if there's if there's a team sitting there at number 1 overall that doesn't need a quarterback, Penei Sewell is going there. Unless a team that needs a quarterback ends up trading up for Trevor Lawrence, I think Penei Sewell is your number 1 overall pick. 6'6", 331, the movement skills off the chart. If Trevor Lawrence, if there is a team that a quarterback needy team, maybe the Raiders try to make a run, if Derek Carr, Marcus Mariota aren't the long-term answers there for Gruden and Mayock. Look, there's already a Clemson pipeline going to the Raiders. 5 Clemson Tigers drafted in the last 2 drafts for the Vegas Raiders. It'd be their second year in the black hole, the new stadium there in Las Vegas. You bring in, Trevor Lawrence. That could make some sense. There's some other teams that could be on the market for quarterbacks. What are the Saints going to do, with Drew Brees? Is Carolina going to be all in with Teddy Bridgewater, or is he more of a stopgap kind of guy? I think there are going to be some teams that could be eyeing this as a potential, is Gardner Minshew really the future in Jacksonville? Those are going to be some questions to be had. And I think some of the quarterbacks that might be looking over their shoulder, Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, look, he's signed for another 2 years, but Minnesota just can't get over the hump. Maybe they're looking to upgrade at the quarterback position. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out and what we see as we go through the season. So we're going to go ahead, and I think those are really your top 2 quarterbacks. I'm sorry, your top 2 picks. And we'll jump into taking a look at all the quarterbacks and everything from there. But I think in terms of a big board, if you're looking at things offensively, the running backs, I think Travis Etienne of Clemson, Chuba Hubbard of Oklahoma State, Najee Harris of Alabama, are really your top 3. And then after that, you can make some arguments after the 3 of them. But just some tremendous running backs there. And we had a pretty solid group with DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You had some really, and J.K. Dobbins, some nice talent there up top. this group has the potential to be just as good, if not better, at the receiver position. Another stack. What's crazy is you got another LSU receiver, another Clemson receiver, another duo there at Alabama. You're getting another receiver from Minnesota. There's another guy out of Ohio State, and USC has not one but two receivers in the fold. But look, there's a receiver out of Wake Forest that's pretty darn good. Could have coming back for one more season. A receiver at Auburn, and look, there's little Rondale Moore out of Purdue to really keep an eye on. And then hey, the return of Tylan Wallace after his injury, he's coming back. So there are a lot of receivers to really, we talked about the depth at the receiver position, and we were talking about a lot of big, massive dudes: Michael Pittman Jr., Antonio Gandy Golden, T. Higgins, Chase Claypool. A lot of big receivers, a lot of big physical guys. And this year, I look at it, yes, Justin Ross at 6'4", 205 is similar to T. Higgins, but you look at these guys, they're a lot more of the speedsters. The guys are going to get vertical. Seth Williams is a 6'3", 224 receiver, but a lot of these guys, Sage Surratt, he's still going to be a guy that's out on the outside. DeMonte Coxie is 6'3", but he's going to be more, one of those outside receivers who is going to rely on some of his speed along with his length. So you don't have these big behemoth hulking receivers. So it's going to be a different dynamic. I think that's the thing that is going to be so much fun about this year's wide receiver class is we're going to have some different conversations, and that's okay. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the season plays out. Tight end, man, we got 2 or 3 tight ends that could potentially be first rounders. Kyle Pitts out of Florida, Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State, Brevin Jordan out of Miami. If you don't know these guys, make sure you watch some film, of them. Definitely some talented players. We got 5 offensive linemen who could end up with first round grades as well. I mean, offensive tackles. In addition to Penei Sewell, you've got Samuel Cosme out of Texas, a guy who is an easy mover laterally. The athleticism is off the charts. Walker Little coming back off of that knee injury that took him out of 2019. He was supposed to be one of the top tackles in the 2020 draft, and ended up messing up the knee, so he was out of commission. Alex Leatherwood, healthy, but he decided he wanted to come back to Alabama. I thought that was a smart choice. He can end up being one of those guys that's going to be a first rounder. He was a borderline fringe first, second rounder, probably going to end up moving into that second day. So he has a chance to really redeem himself. Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan, the right tackle. Look, everyone talked about John Runyon and Ben Bredesen. You've got Jalen Mayfield out on the right tackle position. And yes, he struggled with some speed rushers, and I think there were times where especially Chase Young was really abusing him there on the right side. But this is a guy who definitely has the length, he has the movement skills. He's someone to keep an eye out for. And even, Alaric Jackson, we can't rule him out as another, the Iowa Hawkeye, the left tackle. He went down to injury, and Tristan Wirfs kicked over to left tackle. Ultimately when he came back, and Tristan Wirfs moving over to the right side of that offensive line, you saw a complete difference there up front. And, I think Alaric Jackson has a chance to sneak into the first round as well. Guards, we only have one interior lineman with a first round grade. What's going to be interesting is how many out of this group are going to have that first round grade. I think Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State is someone to really keep an eye out for. The junior was especially dominant there on that Ohio State front, and he's someone to keep an eye out for. Trey Smith out of Tennessee, the guy that everybody talks about, mostly known for the blood clots. But man, this was a guy, he started at tackle there with Tennessee, kicked inside to guard, and a guy who can be dominant there. He has some good movement skills, struggled a little bit with the speed rushers off the edge at the tackle position. Doesn't really have that issue at guard. Want to see him generate a little bit more movement, but man, he's a guy that can end up being a first round talent. And then I'm going to give you another name to keep an eye out for. How about Cade Mays out of formerly of Georgia, now at Tennessee, and as a grad transfer. And, Cade Mays may end up playing tackle with the Vols, but he's going to be a guard. 6'6", 328. I think when Isaiah Wilson and Andrew Thomas, didn't play in the bowl game, Cade Mays got a chance to play the tackle position, and it wasn't pretty. He was getting beat by the speed rushers. So I think his job, will be protecting the quarterback from the interior of that line. And I think, that's something to where he could end up being a day 2 pick, maybe even slide into day 1, depending on how things go. And then obviously Oklahoma's junior center, Creed Humphrey. This guy has already blocked for a Heisman Trophy winner, and was on the roster there for Baker Mayfield as well, but he's blocked for Kyler Murray, blocked for Jalen Hurts. Now he's going to be blocking for Spencer Rattler. You're going to see him in the running game. He'll be blocked for Kennedy Brooks. I think he's also solid in the pass sets as well. He's a former wrestler. We know how wrestling translates to football, the leverage, the center of gravity, the balance, and you definitely see that with Creed Humphrey. So, looking at things from the offensive perspective, I think there are a lot of guys that have potential to be day one picks. You can only have so many guys. Only 32 picks can be in round number one, but we've named off quite a few guys to keep an eye out for. On the defensive side of the ball, looking at the defensive end and the pass rushers there, Gregory Rousseau out of Miami, the U, 6'6", 251, 15 and a half sacks a season ago as a redshirt freshman. The tremendous length. I mean, the length is ridiculous. The guy who can really bend off the edge. He's someone to keep an eye out for as a potential top 5 pick. Carlos Boogie Basham out of Wake Forest comes back for a senior season, 6'5", 275. Look, 10 sacks this past season. He was really on fire as the season began there with the Demon Deacons. And as the season went on, didn't see him getting into the quarterback quite as much. So that was really kind of cause for some concern. Why did he slow down as much as he did? That's really the biggest worry that I have. But look, there's no doubt that Boogie Basham is a guy who has the potential to be a first round pick as well. So then we move to the interior of the line, and Marvin Wilson out of Florida State was a guy, 6'5", 311. Everybody talked about him as being that guy, the guy that everyone's going to keep an eye out for. He was the guy that's going to be the next big thing. And ultimately decides he's going to come back to Florida State. And honestly, I thought that was probably the best decision that Marvin Wilson could have made, because I thought he was inconsistent. A lot of the big stats, when people pointed to, hey, look at Marvin Wilson's stats there at Florida State, I think some of those stats were inflated because of a couple of big games. There were parts where he just kind of disappeared, and that's really my biggest concern is if he's going to be a player that's going to disappear at times on you, that's going to be, really the biggest worry. When you have 8.5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks, but, really 6.5 of those were against, of those tackles for loss, and 4 of the 5 sacks were in 2 games, Louisville and Syracuse. And in those games, he was absolutely dominant. Louisville, he had 10 tackles from the defensive tackle position. Against Syracuse, had 6 tackles. So a guy who has that potential, but he has to make sure that the production matches the potential. And that's really, if he wants to elevate his game and be a guy that's considered as a top 15, top 20 pick, if he wants to be Derek Brown or Javon Kinlaw, he's got to step up his game. He's got to be more consistent. Tyler Shelvin out of LSU, the mammoth, 6'3", 346-pound nose tackle, a guy who, look, he's a space eater. He's someone to keep an eye out for potentially, though, as a first rounder, because you can't find too many nose tackles like him. I'm going to give you one more name, a junior, Jalen Twyman out of Pittsburgh, 6'2", 290, interior pass rusher extraordinaire. 12 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks. Keep an eye out for him. If he decides to declare, he's one of those guys who could be sneaky good and end up moving up draft boards into round number 1. Linebacker position, I got a few for you. Micah Parsons out of Penn State, 6'3", 245, 109 tackles a season ago. Look, he had 82 as a true freshman. 14 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 5 pass breakups, 4 forced fumbles. This guy was the heartbeat of that Penn State defense. You had Yetur Gross-Matos, you had John Reed, you had Cam Brown, you had Robert Windsor, but really the heartbeat of that defense was Micah Parsons. And that's the thing. I think, if Penn State really wants to make some noise, yes, you have Sean Clifford, the quarterback there, but keep an eye out for number 11 and see where he is. He's going to be all over the field. That's going to be the guy, that's really, if he has a tremendous year and Penn State's defense is firing on all cylinders, watch out, Big Ten, because the Penn State Nittany Lions will be coming for you. You've got Dylan Moses there at Alabama, 6'3", 235. 2019 was supposed to be his breakout year. He was supposed to be the guy that was going to move on and be a first round pick, be the next linebacker, great linebacker to come out of Alabama. And then he tears up his knee, didn't even get to play in 2019. Decides he's going to come back, though. He's like, you know what, I want to leave it out there and leave on my terms there at Alabama. And so commend him for coming back and wanting to do that. And I'm going to be curious to see exactly what he can do there. In 2020, he's going to be the leader of that, the unquestioned leader of that Alabama defense. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what things do, how he's able to produce there for the Crimson Tide. And then one final name to keep an eye out for. How about Quincy Roche, formerly of Temple, now at Miami. Miami bringing in a couple of grad transfers, 6'4", 235. And look, this is a guy who's been productive in the American Athletic Conference. Now he's moving on to the ACC, a little bit more exposure. 39 and a half tackles for loss, 26 sacks, including 19 and 13, respectively, this past season. 6 pass breakups, 6 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recovery. So this guy has a nose for the football, tremendously athletic. He's somebody, if he has a big year, I think you could potentially be talking about Quincy Roche in round number 1. And then the safety position. You've got some ball hawks in here at the safety position who are tremendous. Andre Cisco of Syracuse, 6', 203, the junior. Look, 14 pass breakups with 12 interceptions. Had 7 as a true freshman and followed that up with 5 in a sophomore campaign. He's a guy that I think should end up being a lock as a first rounder. Javon Holland out of Oregon as well, 6'1", 196. A guy, 9 interceptions, 10 pass breakups in his career. Took one of those 4 interceptions from a season ago back to the house. And, when you talk about him as a punt returner, 15.3 yards per punt return, definitely somebody to keep an eye out for sure. And then you got Jacoby Stevens, the former receiver turned safety, 6', 228. This was a guy who, when LSU down the stretch playing in the SEC championship and in the playoffs, the more you saw this team play, I thought the more you really saw Jacoby Stevens come out of his, it's kind of a coming out party of sorts. I thought he was one of those guys that really played well for Ed Orgeron and company there. And, he was one of those guys. I talked about Patrick Queen, number 8, flashing. In the secondary, Jacoby Stevens down the stretch. Number 3 was flashing quite a bit back there. Everyone's looking for number 7, Grant Delpit, but it was number 3 who I thought was really coming on. And he has a chance to end up being the leader of that LSU defense as the defending champion. So those are some names of guys, and then obviously the cornerback position, I skipped over. I went to the safeties, but we have to, I'd be remiss if we didn't also talk about the corners. Shaun Wade comes back for his junior year, and this is a guy who's versatile. He played corner, he played safety due to injury, and 14 pass breakups, 4 interceptions. This is a kid who's versatile. He has good length, 6'1", 194. Keep an eye out for him, as well as Patrick Surtain Patrick Surtain the second. I feel so old now. I remember watching his father, Patrick Surtain, with the Miami Dolphins. But Patrick Surtain the second, 6'2", 203, the junior, 15 pass breakups, 3 interceptions in his career, 4 forced fumbles as well. Tremendous ball skills, the length, but not to be outdone. There is Caleb Farley out of Virginia Tech, 6'2", 207. The junior, 19 pass breakups in his career and 6 interceptions. Another corner with tremendous length. Keep an eye out for him. And then Paulson Adebo out of Stanford, 6'1", 190. Burst onto the scene as a redshirt freshman. In 2018, 4 interceptions, 17 pass breakups. This was a guy who came in as a highly touted receiver, 4-star receiver, ends up, converting to corner. And this was a guy who seemed to run the routes better than the receivers. Everyone knew what this guy was all about, and very intelligent player. I thought that in 2019 he was exposed a little bit. A guy who was gambling and trying to guess a little too much, and got exposed at times. So I don't think he was ready to be that first round corner just yet. But look, he still has 27 pass breakups, 8 interceptions in his career. Ball skills are tremendous, excellent length. Paulson Adebo, to me, if I'm Patrick Surtain and Shaun Wade, I'm keeping a close eye on what Paulson Adebo is doing there in Palo Alto with the Stanford Cardinal, because I think Paulson Adebo has a chance to be that number 1 corner taken in the draft. So those are the guys that I'm really keeping an eye out for at the top of the draft, potentially being those first round guys. Now I mentioned, I didn't mention the quarterback position yet, because we're going to jump into things with the quarterbacks, take a look at things a little bit more. How about Justin Fields out of Ohio State, 6'3", 223, the junior, he transferred from Georgia and comes in 2019 as the starter at Ohio State. coming in to succeed Dwayne Haskins, 67% completion percentage, over 3,200 yards, 41 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions, also 484 yards on the ground and 10 touchdowns. Good athleticism, not a great arm. Decision making was inconsistent at times. He's somebody who I think has a chance to elevate his game as well. Ohio State, it's one of those things you worry about. You see Dwayne Haskins and some of his struggles early on. Is it more of a product of the system? That's one of the question marks that Oklahoma quarterbacks have right now. Is what Lincoln Riley is doing there? Is it more so the talent of the quarterback, or is it the system and the scheme that's really allowing the receivers to run free and really hitting these wide open receivers? Those are going to be some of the question marks that I think is going to surround Justin Fields. He's going to have to show that he can be an intelligent quarterback out there on the field as well and really captain the ship there for the Buckeyes. North Dakota State has a quarterback probably nobody's ever heard of. And I'll be honest, I haven't done a ton of studying on Trey Lance, a 6'3", 224-pound redshirt sophomore. Comes in as a redshirt freshman in 2019 for the Bison. And look, all he does is throw for 67% of his passes, throws for over 2,700 yards, 28 touchdowns, no interceptions, and rushes for 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns. Are you serious? That's a real coming out party as a redshirt freshman. Now, again, it's an FCS program, so there is that a jump in talent at the FBS level, but with North Dakota State, we already know what Carson Wentz has been able to do at the next level. So we can't really sit there and say, look, this is a guy that just can't get it done. I'm sorry, it's a smaller school. It's just not going to work. We can put that to bed because we already know that what Carson Wentz has been able to do there with the Eagles. Look, he plays Oregon on September 5th. As long as the college football season kicks off, then he'll get to play Oregon. We'll really be able to see what he can do there. That's going to be the most interesting game of all. Is really how does he stack up against a top defense? A team that has some pretty good corners. That's going to be really the main matchup, the main game that I really want to keep an eye out for. And I think you should as well. So beyond that, Jamie Newman from Wake Forest transfers to Georgia to succeed Jake Fromm. You had all these other guys transferring out of Georgia because of Jake Fromm, Jacob Eason and Justin Fields, and now Jamie Newman coming in as a grad transfer from Wake Forest. This was a kid who I thought, I thought he tried to do a little too much for the Demon Deacons. This is a team that started off the year 8-0, and they kind of sputtered down the stretch. He really, struggled when he lost his receivers, lost Sage Surratt, lost Scotty Henderson. 60% completion percentage, just over 60%, 2,800 yards, 26 touchdowns, but 11 interceptions. Got to cut down on some of the mistakes. Did rush for 574 yards, 6'4", 230 pounds. He's a big physical kid, has a decent arm. But again, decision-making, accuracy, those are going to be the big question marks. Can he elevate his game in the SEC? Texas, Big 12 country, Sam Ehlinger. Feels like this guy's been around forever. It's really because he started as a freshman, those 9 games there with the Longhorns, and really the rest was history. This is a guy who plays with tremendous moxie, a guy that is a gamer, and he doesn't have the biggest arm, but he's big, he's physical, 6'3", 230 pounds, rushed for over 1,500 yards, with 25 touchdowns in his career, 68 touchdowns as well, 22 interceptions, pressed a little bit more in 2019, but he still threw for over 3,600 yards, completed 65% of his passes. He's consistently getting better from a completion percentage standpoint. And look, he's losing Colin Johnson. He's losing Devin Duvernay. If he can take this unproven receiving core and really elevate his game and elevate their game because of it, he'll be one of those guys to keep an eye on when it's all said and done. Give you a couple more names as we move on. Kellen Mond out of Texas A&M, 6'3", 217, 57% completion percentage in his career, 52 touchdowns, 24 interceptions, has over 1,300 yards on the ground. I thought this was the guy who really struggled, had chances to have some big games, especially against Alabama. Texas A&M's defense was keeping him in the game, and Kellen Mond just could not elevate his game to allow the Aggies to challenge Bama in that game. KJ Costello out of Stanford, moving on to Mississippi State as a grad transfer, and he wants to get that exposure not only in the SEC but also as the quarterback for Mike Leach, 6'5", 222 pounds, played in only 5 games, battled injuries as a junior, was highly thought of coming out into that 2019 season. He's a guy, another big physical kid. He's a Southern California guy, went to Santa Margarita High School, which was the same high school as Carson Palmer. He'll be one to watch. Kyle Trask out of Florida filled in for Felipe Franks, who now moved on to Arkansas. Both of those guys playing in the SEC. Keep an eye out for the two of them. And then Sean Clifford out of Penn State, 6'2", 216 pounds, the junior. Struggled from a completion percentage standpoint, under 60% completion percentage. He's going to have to work on that. But look, he was a big reason why Penn State was where they were. Keep an eye out for him. He's only a junior, so he's somebody who could come back, as is Tanner Morgan out of Minnesota, 6'2", 215. He was a big reason why the Gophers were challenging for that, that Big 12 title. Tanner Morgan to Rashad Bateman, watch that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then Brock Purdy in Iowa State, 6'1", 210. It's not often that we're talking about a quarterback with the Cyclones, but Matt Campbell has himself a good one there. Nearly 4,000 yards this past season, 27 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's a gamer, not the biggest guy by any means, but he's just a guy who knows how to win. And that's a really fun trait to really follow. Mentioned Travis Etienne, back-to-back 1,600-yard seasons, tremendous hands, 54 receptions. And look, this is a guy who was known more so as just a speed guy, but he really improved his, the lower body strength, added 10 pounds of muscle, was able to start running over guys. And that's really what you want to see. You want to see him add, more dimensions, new dimensions to his game. The physicality was what I really liked about Travis Etienne. Look, Chuba Hubbard, there's a reason why as a freshman, he got all the playing time, and was taking playing time away from Justice Hill. I asked at that time, is it, was Chuba that good, or was it just an issue with Justice Hill? Chuba was just that good. Over 2,000 yards, 21 touchdowns. He has 45 receptions in his career as well. 6'1", 207. I think Chuba Hubbard, is pretty much, he could end up being the number 1 running back in this draft class when it's all said and done. Mentioned Najee Harris, over 1,200 yards on the ground, had 27 receptions in 2019, 6'2", 230, big physical guy, lacks a little bit of a burst, but look, he does have some of that lower body explosiveness, has that hurdle ability, and I mentioned in Oregon, they have that stable of running backs. The junior C.J. Verdell, 5'9", 210, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for the Ducks. Also has 41 receptions to his credit. And, with C.J. Verdell, this is a guy who has the big play potential, a guy who, when Oregon really wanted to lean on somebody and really just pound the football and just really wear teams down, C.J. Verdell was the guy that they gave the football to. This was a guy who rushed for 257 yards on 23 carries and had 3 touchdowns in a win over Washington State. When you want to wear teams down, give the ball to C.J. Verdell. He's a guy to keep an eye out for. Same with Kylan Hill out of Mississippi State, over 1,300 yards last season. 44 receptions as well, 5'11", 215, can run between the tackles, has a little bit of a burst on the outside, but it's his pass protection. He's one of the best pass protectors in college football right now. That's going to mean something, in today's NFL. So keep an eye out for him as well. Max Borghi out of Washington State, 5'10", 197-pound junior, over 1,100 yards in his first 2 years with the Cougs. But look, 139 receptions over the last 2 seasons. This is a guy who is a tremendous athlete, especially as a receiver. Reminds you a little bit of Christian McCaffrey, one to keep an eye out for in the Pac-12. Jatarvius Whitlow, 6', 215, the junior out of Auburn. Big physical dude, a guy that has some athleticism as well. Trey Regis, he's more of the pounder there at Louisiana, 5'10", 218. Look, over 2,800 yards on the ground, 40 receptions in his career as well, 28 touchdowns rushing the football. He's kind of the thunder there with Billy Napier. The Lightning's going to be Elijah Mitchell, 5'11", 217, over 1,100 yards this past season with 16 touchdowns. Elijah Mitchell's kind of the elusive guy, runs with a little bit of power as well. He was the all-around back. You had Raymond Calais, who was more of your scat back, and then you had Trey Regis, who was the power guy, the one cut and go type of a dude. Elijah Mitchell's the guy who I think, can be that 3-down back more so than Trey Regis right now, just because Trey Regis, like I said, is more of that pounder, a guy who's going to really look one cut and go, decisive, just get north and south. Elijah Mitchell, he's one of the home run hitter anytime he gets the football. Rakeem Boyd out of Arkansas, 6', 213, over 1,100 yards for the Razorbacks. He's someone to keep an eye out for. Look, Trey Sermon out of Oklahoma, moving on to Ohio State, 6', 216, grad transfer, battled some injuries, also lost playing time there to Kennedy Brooks. Want to see what he's going to be able to do taking over for J.K. Dobbins. He's behind a pretty darn good offensive line, so it's going to be interesting to see what he does there. I mentioned Kennedy Brooks, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for the Sooners. He's only a junior, but keep an eye out for him, as is Indiana's Stevie Scott, 6'2", 231, big, powerful running back. Puka Williams out of Kansas, 5'10", 170 pounds, back-to-back 1,000 yards on the ground as well, 60 receptions, only 5'10", 170, so he's a smaller guy, but a guy who I think can definitely be a very versatile weapon at the next level. And Spencer Brown out of UAB, 6', 230, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in 2017, 2018. Wasn't quite as effective, battled some injuries in 2019. But look, 78 receptions in his career. I'm sorry, that's only 78 yards on, so he's not much of a receiving option, just 15 receptions in his career. I read my notes wrong. And Spencer Brown, though, he's going to be one of the big physical pounders between the tackles. I think when you're talking about receivers, Jamar Chase has a chance to be a top 5 pick, really a special receiver, 6'1", 200 pounds, the Biletnikoff Award winner, 84 receptions, over 1,700 yards, 21.2 yards per reception, and 20 touchdowns. He was the go-to guy for Joe Burrow. The question is going to be, can he duplicate that type of effort? He's losing Justin Jefferson, losing Thaddeus Moss, but Terrace Marshall is still there in that receiving core. And you lose Joe Brady, but Steve Emsminger is still going to be there. And Jamar Chase is a guy that can separate from just about anybody. He made A.J. Terrell, the 16th overall pick in this past year's draft, look silly. So keep an eye out, obviously, for Jamar Chase. But I mentioned the two Alabama receivers. Devontae Smith, a guy does everything. 6'1", 175 pounds, over 1,200 yards this past season, 14 touchdowns. He's not going to be the burner. That he kind of left that up to Henry Ruggs and Jalen Waddle, who we'll be talking about in a minute, and Jerry Jeudy. But this was a guy, look, tremendous hands, tremendous route runner, kind of did a little bit of everything. And this is a guy, look, against Mississippi, had 11 catches for 274 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then against LSU, 7 catches, 213 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's kind of that all-around type of a receiver, not really someone who's going to be flashy, but a guy who just gets the job done, always seems to be open, always seems to make a big play. Jalen Waddle, the 5'10", 182-pound junior, was kind of the third receiver in that group. The fourth receiver in that group as a true freshman, over 800 yards receiving, despite playing on a team with Smith, Jeudy, Ruggs. As a junior, another 560 yards. Very sudden, very explosive as a receiver. In the return game, has 3 returns for a touchdown, 2 punt returns, 1 kickoff return, dynamic in the open field. Keep an eye out for him. I mentioned Justin Ross out of Clemson, 6'4", 205. Just like T. Higgins, had 1,000 yards as a freshman, 865 yards, 8 touchdowns as a sophomore. Question's going to be, he's going to get compared to T. Higgins. He's going to have to elevate his game and separate from T. Higgins if he wants to be drafted in round number 1. That's the one concern that I have for him. Rashad Bateman, 6'2", 210, the junior, look, vertical threat, 60 receptions, over 1,200 yards, 20.3 yards per reception, and 11 touchdowns. Coming out party for him. Big 10's arguably best receiver. Chris Olave out of Ohio State is one guy who's going to argue about that. 6'1", 185. You had a lot of guys on the team. You had Austin Mack, and you had KJ Hill, and you had Benjamin Victor. A lot of guys who are more possession type receivers, not the burners. They're running in the 4.6s. but knew how to get open. Chris Olave was the guy that was going to only receiver that could really get over the top. He's the guy to keep an eye out for. Can he duplicate that type of production when these other guys are no longer there? These were guys that were able to get open, allowing him to ultimately get that one-on-one matchups on the outside and able to use his speed. Can he do more than just be a vertical threat? That's going to be the big question. Tylan Wallace was a Biletnikoff Award finalist in 2018. 86 catches, over 1,400 yards, just under 1,500 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns. Through 9 games in 2019, another 53 catches, 903 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And ends up getting the injury, goes down for the rest of the year, decides he's going to come back to Stillwater. He's got Spencer Sanders as his quarterback, who's going to be talked about in the following year's draft, 2022. And then you have Chuba Hubbard at running back. Don't know what the defense is going to look like for the Pokes there with Mike Gundy, but I'll tell you what, that offense with these guys, it's going to be explosive. Rondell Moore, you want to talk explosive. This guy is absolutely that. 5'9", 180. The junior works out with the offensive lineman. This guy, can squat a VW bug. I mean, this guy is so strong. 114 catches, over 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns as a freshman. 21 carries, 10.1 yards per carry with 2 touchdowns there, and then a dynamic returner. Both as a kickoff and punt returner. Only got to play in 4 games in 2019, battled some injuries, so hopefully he can return to form. He's very fun to watch, so he's another guy in that Big Ten that you really have to keep an eye out for. I mentioned Seth Williams, 6'3", 224 out of Auburn. I want to see him be more consistent, really step up and be a leader. I thought there was some immaturity that I saw at times there for the Auburn Tiger. Junior, over 800 yards this past season. He's somebody to keep an eye out for. I mentioned Sage Surratt earlier, 6'3", 215 pounds, a junior out of Wake Forest. Went over 1,000 yards in just 9 games, 11 touchdowns. He's somebody who, he reminded me a lot of Michael Pittman Jr., a guy who just was so big, so physical, was difficult to cover and difficult to bring down. I think, Wake Forest, the biggest question mark is, the quarterback situation. You've lost Jamie Newman. So, if he can get some quarterback play there to help him out, he's going to be one to watch. I mentioned USC have not one but 2 receivers to keep an eye out for. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 6'1", 195. The junior, this is a guy, he played in the slot, had Michael Pittman Jr. on the outside, still goes over 1,000 yards, 77 receptions, 6 touchdowns. He's a slot receiver extraordinaire, a guy who just knows how to get open, very smooth wideout, really fun to watch. Tyler Vaughn's out of USC as well, 6'2", 190 on the outside. This is another guy who's a pretty smooth receiver, a guy that can get vertical at times. Really want to see him elevate his game, be that leader of that receiving core. Drake London, if you haven't seen him, he's only a sophomore. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And then you also get Brew McCoy and a Kyle Ford added to that receiving core. Keaton Slovis, watch out. Just saying. De'Ami Brown out of North Carolina, 6'1", 195, went over 1,000 yards. He and Sam Howell really had something fun going there. And it's not just Brown. You also have Daz Newsome, the 5'11", 190 pound slot receiver, also went over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. Those are 2 guys to keep an eye out there for the Tar Heels. Mentioned DeMonte Coxie earlier, 6'3", 197. You had Antonio Gibson on the roster as well, but DeMonte Coxie's been the most consistent weapon there in the passing game for Brady White the past 2 seasons. Back-to-back seasons with over 1,100 yards, 16 touchdowns in those 2 years. He's going to be a vertical threat, a guy that also likes to work the middle of the field. He's one of the more underrated receivers in this draft class. Nico Collins out of Michigan. You also have Tarek Black, big physical dude, over 6'4", a piece. And those are 2 guys that, look, they're going to be big, they're going to be physical, they can make plays down the football field. I really want to see them elevate their game. Are they going to be more than just the 50-50 ball guys? Are they, a one-trick pony, or can we have these guys, separate down the field? Can they run more routes, the route tree? I want to see these guys really elevate their game now that Shea Patterson's no longer there. I mentioned Terrace Marshall, 6'4", 200 pounds. He was kind of the forgotten man. He was really the 5th option in that receiving core. He's going to be the guy to really complement Jamar Chase. He's looking to have a big season. He's only a junior, but he's someone to keep an eye out for. Whop Philyor, the 5'11", 178-pound junior there at Indiana. 1,000-yard receiver, nice slot option. Marquez Stevenson, the track guy there for Houston, 6 foot 190, a guy that can definitely get vertical on you. Tutu Atwell, just 5'9", 153, the little spark plug there for the Louisville Cardinals. 69 catches, over 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, very explosive athlete. Only a junior, though. I expect him to come back for his senior season. So those are the receivers to kind of keep an eye out for right now. Mentioned tight ends. Kyle Pitts, look, 6'6", 239, the junior. This is a guy who I think is going to run very well. If he runs in the 4.5s, he'll probably be a first-round pick. 54 receptions, 649 yards, 5 touchdowns. Right now, he's my early season favorite for that John Mackey Award. Pat Freiermuth, 6'5", 256, a guy who's a decent blocker as well. Pitts and Brevin Jordan are more of the receivers on the outside, not as polished as blockers as Pat Freiermuth is. A guy who was a tremendous weapon for Sean Clifford. They don't have KJ Hamler, as a vertical threat. Pat Freiermuth is going to be a guy that's going to be attacking the seam on a consistent basis. Mentioned Brevin Jordan out of Miami, 6'3", 235. Another guy who's going to be a speed demon out on the outside. Jalen Weidermeyer out of Texas A&M. He's a redshirt sophomore, 6'5", 260. In 1 year, 32 receptions, 447 yards, 6 touchdowns. Tremendous option there for Kellen Mond. He's someone to keep an eye out for. I like Matt Bushman out of BYU, 6'5", 245. And look, this guy just continues to get better and better. Past season, 47 catches, 688 yards, and 4 touchdowns. One of those underrated tight end options. I'll give you a big guy that nobody's really talking about out of Iowa State, Charlie Kolar, 6'6", 252, 51 catches, 697 yards, 7 touchdowns. Really turned into a big weapon for Brock Purdy, especially in the red zone. Tremendous length. Keep an eye out for Charlie Kolar. He could be one of those juniors that ends up sneaking into the draft. So I mentioned the offensive linemen, the offensive tackles to really keep an eye on for the first round. Liam Eichenberg out of Notre Dame. Keep an eye out for him. He was a guy that I was really scouting as a potential day 2 pick. Decides to come back to Notre Dame for one more season. He's somebody who's one of those fringe first round, more than likely going to be a round 2 player, but really a solid left tackle. Really the biggest thing for him. He only gave up a couple of pressures, no sacks, but 11 false start penalties. That he's got to clean up. Sam Schluter out of Minnesota, I thought he held his own against a lot of the players there in the Big Ten. Struggled against AJ Epinesa, struggled against Chase Young, but there are a lot of other guys that he held his own against. And then on the opposite side there for Minnesota, the junior Daniel Mount Fa'alele. This guy's 6'8", over 400 pounds, and just a mammoth man. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch him, he's a lot of fun to watch. And Landon Young out of Kentucky. They have Logan Stenberg, who was drafted in this past year's draft in the 4th round. Landon Young's another guy who I think has a chance to move into day 2. Guards, not named Trey Smith, Wyatt Davis, and Cade Mays. How about Deontay Brown out of Alabama, the veteran there for the group up front for the Crimson Tide? Jack Anderson's a guy who's nasty, will get in there and really fight for you. Elijah Vera Tucker out of SC. There's rumors that he may end up moving to tackle. His home at the next level is going to be at guard. He thought about coming out and entering the draft, but ultimately is staying there with the Trojans. And then Blaze Andrews out of Minnesota. Minnesota is going to be interesting up front. They've got a lot of really talented offensive linemen blocking there for Tanner Morgan. I expect a big year for him. And then at the center position, not only is Creed Humphrey, there's another junior, the Georgia Bulldog, Trey Hill. I think he has a chance to have a big year and could potentially sneak in his way into that day 2 conversation as well. Defensively, mentioned Gregory Rousseau, the 15.5 sacks, and Carlos Basham. Kwity Paye and Aiden Hutchinson there for Michigan. Kwity Paye, 6.5 sacks. Aiden Hutchinson, just 3.5 sacks. Paye's a senior, a guy who has, he's 6'4", 277. Kind of that, can he be a 5 technique potentially? I think he could, but I think more than likely you're looking at him as a defensive end in a 43. I think Aiden Hutchinson, 6'6", 278, absolutely could potentially be that that 5 technique in a 34 defense. Reminds me a little bit of Aaron Smith, who played with the Steelers for a long time. Just, had that motor that never quit, and a guy that really worked hard getting after the quarterback. I really like Aiden Hutchinson. Keep an eye out for him. Oklahoma's Ronnie Perkins, 6'3", 251. Tremendous coming off the edge. I really want to see what he can do, and with another year under his belt with Alex Grinch. Got into trouble, didn't play in the playoff. That really hurt Oklahoma because they couldn't really put pressure on Joe Burrow coming off the edge. But Ronnie Perkins is someone to keep an eye out for. Isaiah Loudermilk, huge dude, 6'7", 293 for Wisconsin. Tons of potential, no production. Really want to see him step his game up. Patrick Johnson out of Tulane, 6'3", 250. Probably going to be a 3-4 outside linebacker. Doesn't have tremendous size, but 23.5 tackles for loss, 14 sacks for the Green Wave. Someone to keep an eye out for there. Jaquan Bailey out of Iowa State. I'm a big fan of his. Coming into the season, he was supposed to be a big playmaker there for the Cyclones. 31 tackles for loss, 18 sacks. Has 10 pass breakups, has tremendous length, for a guy who's just 6'2", 255, only played in 3 games in 2019 in his senior season, had the red shirt, coming back for one more year. I think he's going to be a guy that, if Iowa State really wants to challenge in the Big 12 conference, Jaquan Bailey is going to have double-digit sacks. Xavier Thomas, now is his time to really shine there at Clemson. He's only a junior, 6'2", 265, kind of undersized. Really waiting for him to have his breakout party. Is he going to be a guy like Carl Lawson? That's kind of what he reminds me of a little bit. Carl Lawson, a little bit, on the shorter side, but still able to get to the quarterback. Look, Xavier Thomas, just 5 sacks in his 2 seasons there with the Clemson Tigers. He has to have a big year if he's going to be talked about as a guy in the first 2 days of the draft. I'll give you one 5 technique to keep an eye out for in the Pac-12 conference. Thomas Booker out of Stanford, 6'4", 281, 12.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks in his career. He's somebody to keep an eye out for there. And then Coastal Carolina. We're going to talk about Coastal Carolina here for just a second. The Chanticleers. Teron Jackson, 6'2", 265, 28 tackles for loss, 16 sacks in his career. He's somebody to really get excited for there with the Chanticleers. I'm going to make sure that I'm tuning in to watch them play just so I can keep an eye on him. Mention Marvin Wilson and what he needs to do. USC has a guy in Jay Tufele who could end up being the first Trojan drafted in 2021. 6'3", 309, 305. He's only a junior, but a guy who can put pressure on the quarterback, a guy who beats you with quickness. Very quick off the ball, excellent hands. That's one of the things that you see from USC defensive linemen are the hand usage. That's one thing that you can always talk about and always see from USC defensive linemen. He's somebody who's going to beat you. He has tremendous power. He's stout at the point of attack. Guy that can get into opposing backfields. He's somebody to keep an eye on as an ascending player in this year's draft. LeBrian Ray, 6'5", 292. I think he's going to be, now's his time, there for Bama, on the defensive line. He's going to be the leader of that defense, at least up front defensively, with Dylan Moses leading the linebacking core, Patrick Surtain in the secondary. Mentioned Jalen Twyman. You've got Mustafa Johnson out of Colorado, 6'2", 290. First year as a sophomore with the Buffs, 15.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, played in only 8 games in 2019, struggled with some of the injuries, still had 4.5 sacks in that time. Keep an eye out for Mustafa Johnson. He's somebody who people aren't really talking about, but somebody that I'm really anxious to see get back out on the field, be completely healthy. Daryl Slayton is another mammoth dude there for Florida, 6'5", 342. Everyone's talking about Tyler Shelvin right now, and rightfully so, what he was able to do there at LSU. He was the immovable object. Slayton is going to get a chance to be that starter there for the Gators, someone to keep an eye out for. Then you have the Stills brothers, Darius and Dante Stills at West Virginia. Darius, 6'1", 292, 15.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in his career. But then you have Dante, who's 6'3", 295, only a junior, but this was the playmaker for the Mountaineers up front. 14 tackles for loss and 8 sacks in 2019. A guy who just continued to make plays in opposing backfields. He's somebody that is going to be an ascending player and someone to really keep an eye out for as well. Jordan Davis, Georgia, 6'6", 330, big dude. Started as a tight end there the last 2 seasons, played at defensive tackle. He's someone who I think, at the nose, if teams are looking for a nose tackle, he's going to be someone who needs to have a big year to really move into that day 2 conversation, but could be that 4th round pick and really be a nice add for a team. So those are my defensive tackles to keep an eye out for. There's also Levi Onwuzurike, for the Huskies, 6'3", 293. He's someone to keep an eye out for, as is Niles Pinckney from Clemson. On the shorter side, 6'1", 295, compact, but a guy that can make plays in the backfield. Naquan Jones out of Michigan State is going to get a chance to start there for the Spartans. And then Brandon Peely of USC, 6'4", 325, a big dude there up front. He'll run in that rotation with Jay Tufele and Marlon Tuipulotu. Linebackers. Already talked about Micah Parsons. I think he's going to be a special guy, a top 10 pick in my opinion. You have Dylan Moses, who have top 10 talent. Can he stay healthy? Quincy Roche is your pass rusher. Merlin Robertson, a guy who came in as a true freshman there for the Arizona State Sun Devils and had 77 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, had an interception as well. Number 8 in the middle of that defense there for Arizona State. Has tremendous range, tremendous athlete, big dude as well. Someone to keep an eye on. Joe Tryon of Washington, 6'5", 262, staying in the Pac-12. The junior pass rusher, 12.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks this past season. He's someone definitely have to keep an eye out for. How about Chaz Surratt? Such an interesting case here. 6'3", 230 out of North Carolina. Was a quarterback. I remember him as a freshman. Played in 9 games, 58% completion percentage, over 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Was also a quarterback in 2018. Moved to linebacker, and that was probably the best decision he could have ever made. 115 tackles, 15 going for loss, 6 sacks. This is a guy who not only was a volume tackler, knew how to get into the backfield, did a good job diagnosing plays. Look, he was a former quarterback, so he's able to really diagnose those plays at that level and make plays behind the line of scrimmage. He's someone to really keep an eye on, really new to the position, but somebody who I think can make some noise here in 2020 in the ACC for the Carolina Tar Heels. Patty Fisher, burst onto the scene back-to-back, 110-plus tackle seasons there for the Northwestern Wildcats, 6'4", 246. Kind of had a down year. Really, Northwestern had a down year period in 2019. He's looking to rebound and really get his name back into that conversation in the first round. I think, first mock drafts that came out, Patty Fisher was talked about as a potential first round pick, possibly to Green Bay. They needed inside linebacker help. He's trying to work his way back into that. Jack Sanborn, look, he has to prove that he wasn't just a product of Zach Bond. People really having to worry about him. And so Jack Sanborn making plays there for the Wisconsin Badgers. 6'2", 232, the junior. It now is his, I keep talking about now is his chance to shine, but Zach Bond's gone. It's Jack Sanborn's defense. Keep an eye out for this kid. 9 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 3 interceptions as well. A guy who makes, just always seems to be around the football. KJ Britt out of Auburn, 6', 236, inside linebacker, a guy who likes to make some plays behind the line of scrimmage. Money Rice of Georgia, 6'1", 235, tremendous range there. A volume tackler, a guy that can drop into coverage a little bit. Someone to keep an eye out for, had 89 tackles this past season. Pete Werner, this guy, blue collar type for Ohio State, one of those Ohio State linebackers that you really love to watch. 6'3", 239, just a consistent player, really does well in coverage. And that's, I think, what's ultimately going to be his calling card, is a guy that can drop into coverage, read the quarterback's eyes, and make some plays. On the interior, that linebacking core is going to be Tuff Borland, playing the mic, 6'1", 232, 3-year starter at the position. Not a flashy guy, another blue collar type, 15.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks in his career as well. Colin Schooler out of Arizona. This guy's a tackling machine, over 300 tackles. Look, he fell 4 tackles shy in 2017 and 2 tackles shy in 2019 from being a guy that we would talk about as having 3 straight seasons with over 100 tackles. That said, 119 tackles in 2018. A guy who has 46 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, 4 interceptions, 7 pass breakups, 6'1", 239, best linebacker nobody's talking about, and somebody who I think is just going to continue to rise up draft boards because all the guy does is make plays. If you want a junior linebacker to keep an eye out for that's kind of maybe under the radar a little bit, how about Ernest Jones out of South Carolina, 6'2", 235, tremendous athlete, 97 tackles there at the interior line, at the Mike linebacker for the Gamecocks. He and TJ Brunson there, and I guess it really wasn't the mic. I think they were running some of the 3-4 sets, but in any event, 5 pass breakups as well. A guy who can drop into coverage, can make plays behind the line of scrimmage, tremendous range. I think he could be inside or an outside player. How about Jeremiah Koromoa for Notre Dame? 6'2", 216, undersized linebacker, more of that new age linebacker, though. 80 tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 4 pass breakups. A guy who had, quick twitch player, a guy that can really get off the ball in a hurry, as is Devin Lloyd out of Utah. Look, you had Bradley and and you had, Francis Bernard and Lecky Fotu and John Pennicini, in that front seven. But Devin Lloyd was a guy nobody talked about. 6'3", 235, 91 tackles, 11 going for loss, 6.5 sacks. He's a junior, and that might be his last year for the Utes, if he has a big season. Blake Gallagher, consistent veteran player there for Northwestern, 6'1", 235, had 127 tackles in 2018. And look, I think everybody kind of had a down year there for the Wildcats in 2019. Evanston, Illinois, really hoping that they can get Northwestern rocking. Mohamed Sanogo out of Mississippi. This is a sad story there. 6'2", 244, played in just 5 games as a freshman, and just 1 game as a junior. That sophomore season, 112 tackles, was really the leader of that defense in the middle there. He's someone that I hope can stay healthy, because I think he deserves that. He's one of those guys who can be a playmaker. Baron Browning, 6'3", 248, going to be that guy that's taking over for Malik Harrison, and in a backup role still had 11 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. He's a guy to keep an eye on, there for the Buckeyes. Moving on to the secondary, mentioned Sean Wade, mentioned Patrick Surtain and Paulson Adebo. Who's going to be next in that group? Mentioned Caleb Farley as well. How about Israel Mukuamu out of South Carolina, 6'4", 205. Tremendous length. You don't see too many corners that are 6'4", but he gambles a lot. I think there's some false steps, and some of the receivers with their route running. If you watched him against the likes of especially Jerry Jeudy, just got him twisted all over the field. He's somebody who I think he needs to learn from those mistakes. But teams love the length when it comes to the corners. We mentioned Patrick Surtain and his dad. How about Asante Samuel Jr.? He's got a dad that was an NFL player as well, 5'10", 180 pounds. The junior, 23 pass breakups in his career, just 1 interception. You really want to see him be a playmaker, be that ball hawk, but he does have tremendous ball skills. Eric Stokes, out of Georgia, only a junior, 6'1", 185, 18 pass breakups in his career, has yet to pick off a pass. Little concerning there, a little bit of stiffness to his game, but definitely a guy who I think is, a very more than serviceable corner there in the SEC conference. Elijah Molden, I thought, was the best the best secondary player there for Washington, the best defensive back. 5'10", 180 pounds, was a guy that I think can really be that nickel corner. 12 pass breakups, 4 interceptions there for the Huskies to lead the way. Coney Durr, 5'10", 200, a corner to really keep an eye on, a guy who just continues to get better and better each and every year. 10 pass breakups this past season, and someone to keep an eye out for. I think he was one of the more consistent corners for the Gophers. Oregon, you've got Javon Holland, but they've got a pretty good corner as well in Thomas Graham, 5'11", 197 pounds for Oregon. Look, guy who has 10.5 tackles for loss, so we can play up on the line of scrimmage, has 8 interceptions, 32 pass breakups. Think about that. That's tremendous production there for the Ducks, a guy who is a playmaker, as is the guy on the opposite side, a guy who I think is going to be that slot corner at the next level. Diamador Lenore, 5'11", 202, the senior. 21 pass breakups, 5 interceptions in his career as well. Yet another playmaker there for the Ducks in the secondary. So I think that's a really nice dynamic duo that they have going on there. Darion Kendrick out of Clemson, 6 foot, 190 pounds, only a junior. He was the guy that was kind of the unsung secondary player there, because everybody was talking about AJ Terrell and Tanner Muse and Kayvon Wallace. Now is his time, so he'll be somebody to keep an eye out for. Can he elevate his game? Chase Lucas is a fun corner to watch there in the Pac-12's got a lot of really good corners. He's 6 foot, 176 pounds, 17 pass breakups, 6 interceptions, a guy who has tremendous ball skills. And look, he reads, he reacts, 11 tackles for loss in his career, so he's a guy that flies around to the football, makes plays, wraps up well as a tackler. Tyson Campbell's the big corner there for Georgia, 6'2", 185 pounds, the junior. Really want to see him step up, elevate his game, be a playmaker, make a play on the football a little bit. Josh Jobe is going to be the other starter at the cornerback position, 6'1", 189 pounds. The junior, we're going to have to see what he can do there at the position. Trey Dean and Marco Wilson at Florida. Dean's the junior. I think he has a little bit more juice to him than Marco Wilson does. But a guy who, CJ Henderson was the guy there, and Marco Wilson was the other starter. Trey Dean was kind of the forgotten man. Really want to see Trey Dean elevate his game. Marco Wilson, I thought, is kind of, as a freshman, 10 pass breakups. That was really his best year. Really waiting for him to kind of elevate his game. Was only played in one game in 2018, out due to injury. 2019, up and down season. Really want to see him rebound. KJ Sells, transfer from UNC to South Florida, 5'11", 175 pounds. A guy who has tremendous ball skills, have 15 pass breakups in his career at North Carolina. Problem was he couldn't make plays on the football. Shows up for USF and ends up picking off 3 passes for the Bulls. You have him at one cornerback position, and then on the opposite side, you have Mike Hampton, 6'1", 190, had a tremendous 2018 campaign. Everyone was expecting him to have a big 2019 year and potentially declare for the draft. In 2018, 2 interceptions, 16 pass breakups, and the production really fell off. I thought he struggled. He was gambling a lot more, was guessing, and was really, frankly, getting beat. So there's a lot of bad tape out there for Mike Hampton. He has to really rebound and really, resurrect that image that he had established for himself after that sophomore season. DiCaprio Bootle, one of the best names. He's on the all-name team, if nothing else. 21 pass breakups in his career. A guy who I think could be a slot corner, play the nickel potentially. No interceptions. So you always worry when a corner doesn't have any interceptions. Is he a guy that can ultimately make the big play when it's needed, or not? That's really the thing. Either you have it or you don't. Ambry Thomas, everyone talked about Lavert Hill there at Michigan. Before that, it was David Long. Ambry Thomas now 6 foot, 182 pounds. Really want to see him step up. Had 3 interceptions as kind of the other guy in that secondary. And then we're going to talk about Syracuse's Trill Williams, 6'2", 200. A guy who can play the corner, play the safety. Really want to see him elevate his game as well. Another guy who just needs to have some additional production there at the position. He's only a junior, likely to come back for a senior year unless he and Andre Cisco can have a huge year in the secondary. Talked about Cisco, talked about Javon Holland already. How about Hamza Nasruddin, 6'4", 215 pounds, tremendous range. In the last 2 seasons, 192 tackles, 5 pass breakups, 3 interceptions, has tremendous length at that safety position. Could he be bulk up and play linebacker? Possibly, but having that fluidity on the back end and a guy who has tremendous range, you really definitely want to have that. Mentioned Jacoby Stevens already. How about James Wiggins out of Cincinnati? 6 foot, 205, big physical safety. Guy who's going to come up and hit you hard. Didn't play in 2019, out with an injury. But a guy, had 4 interceptions in 2018 as a sophomore with the Bearcats. He's somebody to keep an eye out for. A lot of fun to watch, as is Richard LeCount. 5'11", 190 out of Georgia. And look, I thought there was a chance he could come out and enter the draft and be a potential top 5 safety. He's coming back, and really he's somebody who, look, just 61 tackles last year, 4 of them coming for loss, 4 interceptions as well, but he's more of that center fielder. So you're not going to necessarily see him making a ton of plays, but he always puts himself in a position over the top to be in the right place at the right time. So he's somebody who I think is an intelligent player, high football IQ. Same goes for Caden Stearns out of Texas. Hopefully he can stay healthy. Just played in 9 games in 2019, 6'1", 205, playmaker there for the Longhorns. Talanoa Hufanga out of USC. If you haven't gotten to watch him play, 6'1", 220 pounds, this dude is a heat-seeking missile who really has no regard for his body. I mean, this is a guy who comes in and he needs to wrap up a little bit better. He doesn't really wrap up all that well, but he's going to come in with reckless abandon, lower his shoulder, and really try to hurt you. And he's injured both of his shoulders as a result. Need to keep him out on the football field. Watch 15 fly around and make plays. Only played in 8 games as a freshman, 10 games as a junior. As a junior, he still had 90 tackles, 7.5 coming for loss, 3.5 sacks. A guy who just flies around to the football, comes downhill, instinctive, reads and reacts, and really makes plays. And he was really the heart and soul of that USC defense, a guy that was really able to fly around on the back end of that defense for the Trojans. Reed Blankenship, out of Middle Tennessee, 6'1", 196, a year removed from a tremendous sophomore season, 107 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4 interceptions, 7 pass breakups. He's really going to be the leader there for the Blue Raiders in the secondary. Only played in 7 games in 2019. You want to really see him return to form. Keep an eye out for him. Richie Grant out of UCF, another guy who had a tremendous 2018 season. 6 interceptions, over 100 tackles in 2019. Teams kind of shied away from him a little bit. Only one pass that he was able to pick off, but you still saw the ball skills. 8 pass breakups. He's a solid safety option there out of the American Athletic Conference. Florida will have 2 guys to keep an eye on. Donovan Steiner out of, 6'1", 203. Jawan Taylor, 6'1", 206. And, a couple of guys who really you kind of have to keep an eye out for. Jawan Taylor filled in as a starter, played in just 10 games this past season. Hasn't really seen the field a whole lot. Now is going to be the time for him. Donovan Steiner has 6 interceptions coming in the last 2 seasons, so he'll be one to watch out for. Another player from Northwestern. How about J.R. Pace, 6'1", 205. This is a guy who ball skills definitely has him. 12 pass breakups, but 7 interceptions. He's one of those guys. The first 2 seasons played really well, had a subpar 2019 season. Really, that Northwestern Wildcat team, everybody did. I think that's the year that Pat Fitzgerald would just like to forget about. Hopefully they can rebound. And, if that Northwestern defense can really get things going, they'll be a difficult team, a difficult out for any of those top programs there in the Big Ten. And then finally, one other name to keep an eye out for is Ashari Crosswell. Will be the leader there along with Chase Lucas with the Sun Devils, 6', 196, the junior, with 19 pass breakups and 6 interceptions in his first 2 seasons there in Tempe. He's going to be someone, again, keep an eye out for him. He's a guy who has tremendous ball skills. Definitely on display this past season. He'll get a chance to step up and be one of the leaders of that defense. So those are just a few of the guys that I'm going to be keeping an eye on here in 2020, the 2020 season. It's kind of hard to believe that we've put together 41 podcasts for the 2020 podcast series. I hope that you've enjoyed the ride. I know that I have, really getting to watch Joe Burrow emerge as this talent, and talking about Tua Tagovailoa and tanking for Tua with Miami and what all of that looked like. And then he goes down to that hip injury. A lot of different storylines. I talk about storylines, ad nauseum, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, but it's so true. Every draft is going to have that narrative. And what's that narrative going to be? You had Baker Mayfield at the top. Who was going to be the number 1 quarterback there? You had the 5 quarterbacks ultimately taken there in round 1. Kyler Murray going number 1 overall in 2019. 2020, you have Joe Burrow. You have Tua Tagovailoa, some of that drama. Justin Herbert, where was he going to go? Where was he going to slide? He ends up going number 6 overall. And then Green Bay trading up to get Jordan Love. I think those are going to be some of the narratives that we'll be talking about when it's all said and done. Chase Young, number 2 overall. The big playmaker. I think he's destined for success. But really the question is going to be, can he live up to the hype? Can he live up to those expectations? He's been able to do it so far at Columbus. I hope he can continue that stretch. And here's one of the things that I really would love to see to start out the 2021 season. If we could somehow get Washington, the Redskins, to play whoever drafts Penei Sewell. I want to see that match of Penei Sewell against Chase Young. Frankly, I'd love to see Penei Sewell against J.J. Watt, against Myles Garrett, against all of our top pass rushers, Khalil Mack, because this is a guy, I'm telling you, if you haven't gotten to watch him play, he's a special talent. You don't see too many tackles that, this athletic, and this powerful this often. A guy who's just, he's a technician as well. So you have a lot of the athletes who are raw. This guy has a ton of ability, and is already, a guy who doesn't make too many false steps. Can he stay healthy though? Because he did battle injuries, as a freshman. Sophomore season, absolutely dominant. I don't anticipate anything being different in 2020. Let's hope for a 2020 season. I hope that even if we have a late start to the season, I hope that we can get that season under our belt and really be able to watch some great college football and frankly, an NFL season as well. I know that later on in the week, the NFL is going to be releasing their schedule for the 2020 season. So, hopefully, we can get to some semblance of normalcy, with this pandemic, sheltering in place. We know that we're not going to see a ton of large crowds. Some, states are going to be more strictly mandated than some others, which is why you'll have some difficulty with some of the really some of the teams there from a collegiate standpoint, and really with the NFL as well. So I don't know, you may have some parts of the country where you may have packed houses versus other areas where you may only have, partial stadiums. Is that going to be fair? How's the NCAA going to handle that? Can we still have some social distancing in these stadiums, have limited capacity? When you think about it, when you think about the NFL and you think about the, college football, not having the fans, that's really going to affect, a lot. When you're talking about the economy, that affects so many people. That affects, millions upon millions, billions, frankly, of dollars of revenue that for the league, for college football as well in the NCAA. But it's for all of those vendors, all the local vendors, and that's their livelihood. That's their business. That's really what they count on. So I'm hoping, for them. I'm hoping for the fans. I'm hoping for the players. Everybody has some skin in the game with this. So I really hope that we can get to some semblance of normalcy so we can have, a football season. I'm a football fan. I'm a baseball fan. I'm a basketball fan. I love hockey. I love all sports. But football has always been my first true love. And, I know baseball's America's pastime, but football is truly American, and that's one of the things that you really want to get back to is watching American football. Being able to watch the NFL, watching college football, and I think all's well in the world when you're able to really be able to turn on and watch those games on a Saturday or a Sunday, I guess, or a Monday or a Thursday, or in college you have some of those Friday night games too. But I digress. Let's hope for that 2020 season. Hopefully I've given you something to think about, some players to keep an eye out for. There are a lot of guys that were going to be out there. We had 255 guys drafted, from Joe Burrow to Tay Crowder. Who's going to be the number one overall pick? Will it be Trevor Lawrence? Will it be Penei Sewell? Will somebody rise to the occasion like Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Joe Burrow have in previous seasons? It's going to be interesting. I can't wait. And I promise you, I'll be studying some tape. I'll be taking a look at my notes. I'll be making sure that I'm prepared so that come August, hopefully as long as we're having that season going forward, in August, I'll bring to you the 2020 podcast season. The first episode, we'll take a look at the players, take a look at my top 10 for each of the positions. A lot of these guys that I mentioned will probably be in that top 10. Some other guys to take a look at. We'll take a look at some of the matchups to watch out for as we get into the season as well. And then we'll do all this all over again. Hopefully we'll do another 40 to 41 podcast for the 2021 season. So with that, the 2020 podcast series is a wrap for ReadyForTheDraft.com. This has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Hopefully, everyone's been safe. Hopefully you enjoy a good 2020, as good as it can be. Stay safe, be well, take care, everyone. And on that note, I am out of here.